9 persons are like liking, retweeting, distributing. And it's just one who is really twittering or posting. So I think what you're doing is focus, try to make this one maybe a little bigger percentage and go on with that. Okay, so now Darren, you are award-winning social media user. The floor is yours now.
Thank you. And of course I'm the last person before you all go off disappearing to drink and eat, so you'll be wanting me to get done really quickly. Yeah, my name's Darren Caveney. I'm Head of Communications at Walsall Council in the UK. Walsall, for those people that don't know, is northwest of Birmingham, and if you don't know where Birmingham is, it's about an hour and a half north of London, so that kind of places us. I wear 2 other hats though. I'm also Vice Chair of an industry body called EuroPcom, which represents UK local government. And I also, in what bit of part-time I've got left, I look after a website called Comms 2.0 with a colleague as well, which is full of some best practice communications information. So have a look at that, plug over. I think back in 2008, I think back in 2008, certainly the importance of social media had emerged, and it was a bit of a wake-up call, I think, for communicators in local government in the UK, because I think we quickly realised if we didn't quickly get on board with these channels, with these opportunities, we'd be probably unemployable in about 3 years' time. So that, if nothing else, was a big motivation to get our heads around social media. Clearly, we identified it as a valuable tool for communications people, but also their customers, more importantly. Try to develop a strategic approach, very quick to just jump in because it's the latest fad and have a go at things, but we've tried to be strategic with its use. And certainly myself and colleagues in the team have been championing social media as a business comms tool now in those 4 years since. So 4 years on, we've learnt lots. Some things have gone well, some things have gone badly, and you always learn from both, don't you? So I'll spend the next 10 minutes quickly sharing 10 golden lessons that I think we've learnt on how best to use social media strategically. Probably the biggest challenge though, you've seen some brilliant presentations and case studies from people today. Actually, some days when you're at the front line of being in a communications team, it's all you can do to answer the telephone, respond to emails. So when you kind of bolt social media and other things onto day jobs, it becomes horribly difficult, and I'm sure many of you in the room will kind of identify with that. So, lesson number 1 for me was really about taking a look at the team. Somebody earlier mentioned the fact that they've got comms people that were really just wanting to write press releases to local newspapers. Well, what will they do when those local newspapers have gone out of business? You know, you'll quickly find yourself without too much to do. But it's all about the environment really and the culture. So for us and for myself personally, it was about encouraging experimentation and innovation. You know, do you empower and encourage your members of your team to talk for the organisation, to be its voice? That's quite tricky because, you know, in the past, communications people in local government, the voice is very often the politician, the local elected member. So for a comms person suddenly to be in the spotlight, that's quite different. That's a cultural shift, which I think is a good one, but there's a bridge to cross there. But so essentially it comes down to trust. So it's trusting your team to tell the right story, to make those right connections. But really it's about that two-way communication, which others have mentioned already today. But essentially, look at the team, and if you haven't got that environment in your team, then actually I don't think social media is going to work particularly well, or certainly not as well as it could do. I love pictures and infographics, so we had this one done. Act on the facts, and so it's really easy just to jump on board with the latest fad, whether that's Pinterest or Google Plus or whatever it is. But it's actually about where your customers are, and that'll be different for everybody in the room. So it's about getting good data, understanding who your customers are, where they are, which channels they're using or switching to, when you should engage with them, on which topics, and how social media can add value to this. So it's that sort of rich intelligence that's out there, but it's pulling it together, it's taking the time out to pull something like that together. This was really important for us because very often local government, certainly in the UK, is very reliant, as I say, on local newspapers. And they don't always tell the truth, they don't always tell stories the way they perhaps should be painted. if we've done daft things, then we deserve to be criticised, but not always have we done daft things, and I think it's important that you get your message out there. That infographic there, that showed us some very important things, which were mainly for use internally with some of our internal customers and elected members to say, you know, that press release for local newspapers, great, it's still part of what we need to do, but actually there's a whole other world out there which we need to tackle as well. So you can't see it on there, it's too small, but certainly, you know, the graph around the local newspaper sales, that shows that, you know, halving, more than halving in the last 3 years. You know, it's bought by about 3% of our local residents now. That's an incredibly small number when you think we've got nearly 300,000 people within a 10-mile radius on Facebook. So, you know, there isn't a right or wrong, there isn't a silver bullet. It's about how you use all of these channels, as you know, as you're well known. Sometimes it's about making a strong business case, because senior people often get very nervous, don't they, and they think that this is all a terrible risk and it's going to bring the whole organisation down and we'll be left with egg on our faces. Not necessarily the case at all, but I think it's important that we talk in senior managers' language. It's about, this isn't like a shiny new toy, it's about positioning social media as a communications channel, it's about delivering digital engagement. It's actually a massive opportunity to engage with residents, to get their experience, their insights, their feedback, actually for free at times. I mean, it's an invaluable tool. We talk about innovation, talk about value for money, talk about potential transactional savings. That'll switch many of you off. But actually, in senior management language, those are real big drivers to actually say, actually, yeah, we should be looking at social media. I think one of the things we learned very early on is that big plans and big changes are harder to make in large organisations. The bigger the risk, the more the change, the greater chance of failure, I guess, and potentially the sack. So my wife is very smart on these things, and her advice was always try it small, fly under the radar a little bit, experiment, get confident with these channels, see what works, see what doesn't, and take it from there. I think once you've got your confidence, you can learn from those experiences, which is what we've certainly done. I think then you can learn and you can expand. The little graphic there shows, if you can read that, back in 2009 we had 1 social media account, and now currently we've got 81. It's probably 82 while I've been sat here today. So it's about more, not less. Certainly in the UK, one thing that was happening a couple of years back were comms teams were being very protective over social media, and they weren't allowing anybody else kind of to play with it and to use it. We learned very early on that actually that's not the way to do it, and it's about enabling and engaging with internal services and customers and saying, you know, they've actually often got the more interesting stories to tell. So, you know, we've got amongst those 81 accounts, that's across 11 different platforms, so all the usual ones like Twitter and Facebook, but some of the more niche ones as well. Now, of those 81 accounts, there'll be anything from, you know, a countryside ranger who's out and about in urban Walsall talking about bats and newts and all sorts. You might think, what on earth is local government doing talking about that? She's got about 1,500 followers and is nationally recognised. And, you know, she tweets something, she posts something. You know, her audience is quite niche, but it's very well informed, and those messages go around the country. So she's helped Walsall really develop a face and a profile for things like that. Other officers that we've got that get involved in these kind of things, like town centre managers, librarians, officers at art centres. So it's really quite a diverse picture, and I think it's really important that comms teams actually, you know, as a colleague of mine, Dan Slee, always says, share the sweets, and I think that's important. We do need to share the sweets. The really interesting thing is about telling stories, because, you know, in the past we've all written very bland press releases and corporate messages, and we've crafted them for days and weeks, and they've gone round and been signed off by about 15 people. Actually, social media gives us a chance to tell the really interesting stories, be they big or little. So for me, it's about painting pictures, creating that rich content, and that, as others have said, you know, that really should include images and videos and audio clips. It's about being human, it's about being open, it's about being real and authentic. But also, most importantly, it's about listening and joining in, and others have said that earlier on today. But in short, for corporate comms people in local government, certainly in the UK and I'm sure in other parts of Europe, it's time for a total change in approach. If you haven't changed, got to change really, really quickly, both in terms of delivery, language and style. I think once you've done all of that, lesson number 7 really was about delivering a slightly more strategic campaign. So back in 2010, we created something called Walsall 24, and we were the first UK local authorities to run a 24-hour Twitter-thon. So we all got into work at about 5:30 AM and we kind of left at about 6:30 AM. And my wife again wondered what the hell I was doing that day, but it was a really interesting day. We sent out or retweeted 1,300 tweets that day, reached an audience of about 120,000 people, which back in 2010 was pretty good. I'm sure if we did it now, those numbers would multiply some. The really interesting thing was that how it was picked up with the traditional media. Certainly the Guardian picked it up and ran stories with it on the day, as did the BBC Online. The local radio station contacted us for interviews to talk about the programme. And we had local press coverage. Now sometimes our local press are quite critical of us, but actually on that day we did find that we were actually shaping their agendas. The media inquiries coming in were being shaped by what we were tweeting, and that was a really interesting turnaround in kind of how they work. As was mentioned, we won a communications award. That was great, and that helped us, I think, develop further internally. But we actually learned loads about our organisation ourselves. Walsall Council runs about 800 services, so it's impossible to know everything about everything. But we learned as officers quite a lot that day. And it cost zero, which in the era of kind of we're just about to approach an era of having zero marketing budgets, will probably be collateral and paper free. You know, we will be very, very reliant on web and digital in the future. Lesson number 8 is roll it out really. So it's about that wider integration. So a good example would be involving our customer relations team. Lots of the inquiries that come into our social media accounts are actually classic, basic customer inquiries that our customer relations people are best placed to respond to. So we've been involved in a trial whereby our customer services team are now, they've got their own social media account. So that's an interesting development, and I think the public sector in the UK, you know, has to do much more of that in the future. Lesson number 9. There are no experts really. I think we're all still learning, aren't we? It's about sharing and learning. It's about connecting with peers, with residents. We do things like we run social media surgeries with our local residents to help them and to help us. We'll go to events, and if there aren't events in the areas that we're interested in, we'll create our own events. And they can be free, they can take place in a coffee shop. They don't have to cost huge amounts of money. We've got out of the office for the first time in years. We go and visit people that are good at these things, and people have come to visit us in return too. So it's about sharing the knowledge. But that's also true internally as well. So a couple of years back we started using tools like Yammer. I'm sure many of you here perhaps use them. So we can have those internal debates with our own colleagues as well. We've created internal social media groups so we can have conversations like these internally. And again, it's about collaboration. Finally, which is a really important thing, and I think this is an ongoing process, it's about how we review and recalibrate really for comms people. We've rewritten job descriptions and plans and roles. The huge challenge which we face now, as I see, is how we balance the traditional with the new. The traditional work is still important, it hasn't gone away, but actually we've bolted on a whole stack of digital stuff as well. So as comms teams get smaller and smaller and we have less resources, it's how we actually manage that resource and how we actually make sure we're delivering in the areas that are most important to residents. So I think the only way we can do that is to map landscape, understand customers and go where the customers are, as others have said. So, happy to answer questions at the end, but I'll leave you with 3 questions if I can, which are, what does your social media strategy say about your business? What does your attitude to social media say about you? And what are people saying about your business online today? Thanks for being social, and do come and say hello at those contact points there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Darren. You may have realized Hannes already left us because I told you he had to reach his plane. There's still Darren, Sandra, and myself on the panel to take